Welcome back to the I Empower podcast, season 2, where we hear inspirational stories and then we turn that into art that reminds us to be great. Each week, we dive deep into the story of a special person who discovered their power against all odds. But it doesn't stop there. All of the inspiration is then memorialized into a single unique painting that reminds us to be great. So if you, my friend, are looking to step out of your own way and into your life's full and well-deserved potential, this is the place for you.
Everyone needs a therapist at some point in their life, every single person. Whether they choose to do it or not, that's up to them. But I always say, humans are resilient. You can probably get through it. But do you want to suffer to get through it? Or do you want to grow through it? Right? Because yes, you could get through it. But wouldn't you rather grow through it?
All right, Gabriella, thank you so much for being on today. I'm really excited to talk to you. I always like to tell my listeners where I find my guest, and my husband actually connected with you at a networking meeting. I'm hoping I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think you guys need to chat. She's doing some really great things with her practice. And we jumped on the phone, and immediately I felt like we had a great conversation. I was like, let's do this. So welcome to the show, Gabriella.
Thank you.
You are a licensed clinical mental health counselor who specializes in addiction. And I think that is incredible. I know that there's like a ripple effect with mental health. We're seeing kind of like an uptick in it. I know I've had a doctor on the show before, and she mentioned with COVID being one of the main reasons. But what you specialize in is, which I'm assuming that, with COVID, it could bring out a lot of things. People that may have never had issues before, that might have been something that was triggered by that. But I'm really excited to learn about what it is that you do, and just have you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. So, I am, like you said, I'm a therapist, and I work for a private practice in Louisville, North Carolina. So, Louisville Family Counseling, and our practice is quite a bit different than most practices because we have numerous therapists, but each of us specialize in something very different, right? So typically you would call like a therapy office and they're like, oh, who has availability? And you just get put with whoever has availability.
Right.
Here, we don't do that. So we have someone who specializes in like eating disorders. We have someone who specializes in what we call like the littles, which is like 2 to 10.
Yeah.
We have someone who specializes in sex and love addiction, which is super specialized. And so then we have like me, and I specialize in treating addiction, all types of addiction. So that includes substances, gambling, screens. That's a big one right now. Attention, like that kind of like any type of addiction. So I specialize in treating that, and I have a lot of experience working both like in a clinic setting, as well as like a private practice setting. And I specialize in working with teens and gambling. So, I take individual clients. I have a lot of experience doing group work when I was working in a clinic. So that is kind of where I specialize. I also do a lot of couples counseling. So yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, wow. So I think it's so interesting that your practice has certain, therapists that specialize in different things. And, like you mentioned before, a lot of times when you call in and you're like, I need help. They do kind of, I'm assuming, ask you like what it is that you need help with, and then they're just like, this is my next available person, and you just like jump into whoever. So I think that's awesome. Absolutely. Is that like something specific with your practice, or are you seeing more of that with other practices?
I don't know many other practices that do it like we do.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean to say that other practices aren't doing it in some way, but like for instance, when you call our office, you're going to get our office manager or our office manager's assistant, who are phenomenal. And they're going to ask kind of like, all right, what do you need treated? Right. If it's like just like general anxiety or depression, and it's like just anxiety and depression, right. It's debilitating. They're going to say, okay, what are you looking for in a therapist? Right. Because that's one of the things that like all of us treat.
Yeah.
Right. All of us can do that. And so they're going to say, you want someone, a lot of times people are like, well, I want someone who's older or younger, right? Just
Yeah.
depending. And so they're like, okay, that cuts out a couple people. And then they kind of ask, like, what do you like think you want in a therapist? And some of them, like one of the things I've heard before is want someone motherly,
Yeah.
right? Someone who's like naturally kind of mothering and gentle as a therapist, right? Someone who spends a lot of time listening. And those people are probably not going to be paired with me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I am pretty much one of the most direct therapists that there are, right? So, and that's because I specialize in addiction, right? And, in addiction, specifically with teens, there's not a whole lot of room for, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
There's more room for, okay, well, when are you going to change? Because you're going to, like, death is probable if we can't get you off of these substances, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit more direct. So there's certain things that, like, with couples counseling, especially, like, couples who are more like what we call, like, fighty, like there's a lot of yelling and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
the office would be like, okay, you're going to do good with Gabby. Because, like, because that's, like, I have this way of, I use, like, reality therapy, and I do trauma work, and I do a lot of things. And so, so it is almost like a boutique kind of therapy practice versus where most therapy practices are like, they may ask some of those questions, but they're not necessarily, like, I've had clients that I meet with one time and I'm like, I think that you're going to be better fit for someone else at the practice. And I refer them to someone else in the practice.
Yeah.
And it was a much better fit than me, vice versa. Right. And of course we let the clients, like, decide that. I mean, I've had clients who are like, no, I want to work with you. And I'm like, I'm not the best fit, but, like, okay, well, we're going to do it.
We'll try it.
Because that's what they want and what they need. So yeah, it's definitely different than most therapy practices that I have seen. Yeah.
Oh my God. I feel like I have, like, so many things. Okay. So the importance, like, for me, I didn't know that you could literally have a criteria. Like, you could say, I prefer a female. I would prefer someone my age. Like, I think that's so incredible that is, something that people need to know, that they have these choices in life when they're speaking, when they're choosing their therapist, because, me, from my outlook looking in, picking a therapist is a very intimate, personal decision. You want to make sure that you are connecting with that person. And if there are certain things that are important to you, and, picking a therapist that kind of meets that criteria, almost like, I think we talked about this on the phone, like, almost like think of Tinder for a therapist. Like, you can pick, like, if you want a female, if you want a male, if you want a person of color, if you want somebody around your age. Like, I had no idea that you could do that. I always just thought, okay, let me call my insurance and see who's in network, and let me just go from there and basically let the insurance company pick your therapist. But it makes sense to me that you would be able to call an office and say, these are the things that are important to me, and this is what I'm struggling with. And then, you matchmaker.
Well, yeah. And it's so, you should be interviewing your therapist. Everyone should.
Yes,
because at
thank
the
you
end
for
of the
saying
day, like, you're interviewing them. You're about to let them into the most, like, intimate, raw parts of you. It should be a good fit. And, I have people say all the time, I recommend when people are looking for a therapist, there's some questions you should ask, right? One is, have you had a therapist, right? Asking a therapist if they had a therapist. Okay, my personal opinion, if they have never been in therapy, that's not going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
And that's just my personal opinion. I've been in therapy on and off throughout my whole life. And I find something so powerful about a therapist being able to say, without giving any details, like, yeah, I'm in therapy, or yeah, I've been to a therapist. Yeah. And if they say no, personally, I think that's a big deal. Like, we're in this, right? I mean, we're in this profession. We obviously believe in what we do, right? So why not make sure that, like, you're asking these questions? I mean, we've had some people say some pretty interesting things, like, especially, like, I just know from my perspective, we kind of ask people after a while, like, what drew you to that counselor? And I get all the time, I get that I'm a brunette, and I'm like, Really?
What?
Like that was your like
Don't ever
like,
dye your hair.
like deciding factor, right? That was your like deciding factor. And I've had one person say that my photo on the website, this is hilarious. They decided to work with me because I'm the only one whose hair was like not done.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not fighting this. Like, this is what I look like. I'm not doing my hair for a photo.
This is me.
Like, this is what you get. Like, I would never want to do my hair and like straighten it, curl it, you know, in like a stock photo and be like, and then come in and see me like this, like,
right?
You know, and then be like, because this is what you're gonna get.
Yeah,
like, it's just real. And so, you know, we've had people say things like that. It's just like, you know, and with other therapists, like, you know, they were drawn to certain things about them, and so, you know, but yeah, interviewing your therapist. Absolutely. And a lot of therapy offices do like what they call like a consultation, like a 15-minute call where you can ask a therapist some questions for free. Highly recommend you ask if that's an option, right? Most therapists will be like, yeah, like let's talk for 15 minutes, see if we're going to be a good fit. And I always say give it some time because it might not be the first session. It might not be the second session, right?
Yeah, that was my next question for you was like, you know, because you hear about a lot of people say, I knew immediately that was that person. But then like for me, in a general life setting, I feel like within the first 5 minutes of speaking with somebody, I know whether or not this is going to sound terrible. I like the person or we're going to vibe together or I'm going to want to see that person again. And this goes with like friends and this goes with also like, you know, at the time, love interest and things like that. But, you know, with a therapist, like, you know, just my experience, my first, you know, like that initial therapy visit was a lot of like kind of asking you like background and like relationships with family members and things like that. So you didn't really get to like get that like option to be connected with that person. And so I'm like, okay, so like normally I would know whether or not I would like somebody right off the bat, but you're saying too, like take some, you know, maybe give it a little bit and see if it's a good fit. Cause a lot of times we're probably on guard anyways, that initial visit.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's not only, yes, they're on guard. The therapist is trying to get the paperwork done, right? Because paperwork is such a beast when it comes to anything medical or therapy because, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, that we're certified, like we have all the medical forms and stuff. So yeah, paperwork takes a ton of time. It's totally impersonal. And then we have to do an assessment, especially if we're billing insurance, because we have to come up with some sort of diagnosis so that we can bill insurance. And that takes time and we have to get questions answered in an hour, right?
Yeah.
So I tell people straight up, I was like, the first session, we're not going to get anything done except paperwork and like some basic information. Second session, you know, we have to finish assessments because you never finish them first ever. I mean,
right.
Blessed counselor who can finish first session assessments because I'm not there.
Yeah.
So honestly, first 2 sessions, it's not a connection time. So I always say by the 4th session, some people, especially if you have a really hard time opening up, give it 6. If by 6 sessions there is not a clear clicking, try someone else.
Yeah.
Right? And any good therapist is going to take that feedback and be like, they probably know it already, but they're letting you decide. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's just one of those things that we let our clients be like, you know, I'm never going to have hurt feelings when they say, you're not a good fit. Because guess what? I'm not.
Yeah. I think that's another thing too, that like, you know, especially for me, just being like, oh, I didn't really feel like we vibe. Like you almost feel like you're hurting someone's feelings for saying, I wasn't feeling a love connection there. Like, so I think that's important to know, like you said, that you guys don't take it personal if you're not feeling that, but you know, don't just like let it go. If you don't feel that connection with that specific therapist, you know, try another one. Maybe they can refer you to someone else that works in the same specialty that you need.
Yeah.
So yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so addiction, you specialize in addiction. Tell me about that. So like a lot of people, I think it's interesting too that you're working with youth. And are you seeing that a lot of addiction is trauma related? I've some of the guests that I've spoke to on the past on the show who have suffered with addiction, there's always that like pivotal moment in their life that just kind of like there was not necessarily pivotal, like a lot of them is like that pivotal moment, but then sometimes it's like it just leads up to that. And so how important is it to try to catch this at an early age?
So, there's two things there. One, absolutely, trauma is connected to addiction. We look at things in what we call like a biopsychosocial model, right? So that's the human being as a biopsychosocial. So biologically, there are some things that every person inherit, like you inherit from your parents, right? All these things. Yes, you can inherit a tendency toward addiction, right? If every single person in your family forever has struggled with alcohol, you have a higher likelihood of struggling with alcohol, right? So genetically, that is a huge piece, right? So we look at the biology, right? Genetically, some people are predisposed to addiction. Then we look at like the psychology of it. What has happened to you and how has your brain reacted, right? That forms who you are. And then socially, what have you been taught? What has society like imprinted on you? What have your parents imprinted on you? All three of those things create you who you are, right? So when you think about it in that way, it is, there are some people that are predisposed to addiction. Yes, 100%. Right. But if they have enough protective factors, it never becomes an issue, right? So if an adverse childhood experience happens or an adverse experience happens, right, trauma, it can turn on what was already there genetically, or if it wasn't there genetically, it can create a hole, right? And the way that I explain addiction a lot is there's two holes that people are trying to fill, right? One is what we call the chemical hole, right? You're like shovel trying to chemically even out your brain, right? So when trauma happens, so the brain reacts with cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So you either get cortisol sprinkled, which is like a sprinkle of cortisol in your brain, and your brain pauses, but it can return to normal functioning. You're not stuck in like fight or flight mode. Or you get what we call cortisaturated, and then there's cortisoaked. So cortisoaked, maybe I flipped those. Either way. The second one down is when your brain gets kind of soaked in cortisol, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're like, or saturated, whichever one. And so cortisaturated, large amounts hit the brain. It takes you a little bit longer to recover, right? Yeah. So an hour, 2 hours to come back from fight or flight mode. Now, when you are cortisoaked, right, your brain has a trauma reaction, right? Sometimes you get stuck in the fight or flight mode. So your brain kind of fractions off into, yes, part of you keeps living on day to day, right? The other part of you is kind of frozen, right? So when it comes to trauma, yes, right? Addiction is because it's a coping skill. It's a bad coping skill, but it's a coping skill. And whether that's gambling addiction, screen addiction, right? What it's doing is it's flooding your brain with dopamine, which is not a lasting happiness hormone, right? It's we get from cupcakes, sugar, alcohol, and it makes you feel better. So it's filling that chemical hole, right? Mm-hmm. There's still the emotional hole. So even if you get sober, but you don't do any treatment, that emotional hole is still empty.
Yeah.
So you're going to go back to filling the chemical hole, right? So yes, absolutely, so much. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is when you're talking about like teens, how important is it that we hit this early? So for the first time in a long time. So we just got our numbers back, census numbers, that fentanyl overdose is now the number one cause of death for males, I think ages 18 to 24 in the United States. Wow. Okay. Fentanyl. So they separated the different types of overdose. Heroin overdose, fentanyl overdose, like alcohol, like they separated them. So there should be no reason ever that one of those categories should be the top leading cause of death, right? It's almost like a trick. They separated them to make them less scary.
Yeah.
And yet still, it made it to the top of the list, right? So it's one of the leading causes of death from 18 to 24-year-old men. So like,
wow.
Yeah. So is it important? Yes. Are we in this incredible, awful time? So hitting kids when they're young, starting their addiction treatment then, right, makes it so that they're not 87 years old, right, at a methadone Suboxone clinic. Because that's, I've done that. And I've had 80-year-olds, in a methadone Suboxone clinic because they didn't get the treatment as a teen, right?
Yeah.
So, early intervention is always what we want to do. A lot of times it's when kids are experimenting with weed, alcohol, all the things, the vaping, whatnot. And a lot of people don't understand, like, they're like, I know my guy, like, I know my distributor. Guess what? We know that like 60% of stuff on the market is laced with something else.
Yes.
And the thing that people are like, well, that's okay, I don't mind a little extra high. They're not lacing it with stuff that's like expensive. They're lacing it with stuff that's cheap. They're not going to give you free. And I say this every year at Halloween. I'm like, no one's giving you their edibles. They're expensive. No one's doing that to candy. Like, y'all, like that's expensive. No one's doing that for free. So it's the same thing when you're talking about like your distributor.
Yes.
Right? Wherever you're getting drugs from, say they run out and they're like, oh, this time I'll get it from someone else and I'll just supply with that. Guess what? Mm-hmm. It could be a leaky batch. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So early intervention is it would change society. If we could get early intervention, if we could get in the schools, if we could get in and start doing these assessments in, especially gambling addiction right now is through the roof. Problem gambling, screen addiction for teenagers. Largely because of COVID, but also because social media and the scrolling. And so there's so many pieces to addiction is they have a chemical hole, right? So they're not getting enough serotonin. And there's the emotional hole. So even if they haven't gone through anything like what we would call acute trauma, every single person in life goes through what we call complex trauma. Every single person. Yeah. Right? So what one person's brain might react in like a quarter soaked way, someone else's might react in a quarter sprinkled way. Same exact like situation, but your biophysiology changes how you kind of see it. And that's when we get into like, one of the things I hear all the time about people like, well, my trauma's not that bad. It's not as bad as someone else's. We get into this nasty compare culture already in society.
Yeah.
So in therapy, every therapist ever has heard, well, it's not as bad as someone else's trauma.
Yeah.
If your brain reacted the same exact way as someone who was at 9/11, guess what? Scientifically, it is a big enough trauma.
Yeah,
right?
It's still valid. Yeah.
It's still valid. And I always say, well, that's not your trauma, right? You're carrying your trauma, whether it's a complex trauma, betrayal trauma. Like there's so many different types of trauma outside of what we call like acute trauma that, yes, in teens, it's brutal. It's a brutal world for teens. I
say all the time, I couldn't imagine, being a kid in today's society with just the internet and, I don't know. I just had to worry about those magazines when I'm a millennial. So I just had the, like teen magazines that I had to, comparative think with. And, there just wasn't that addiction to something like there is, when we're talking about screen addiction and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I do want to circle back to discussing about the drug addiction and how that can, it starts out with experimenting and then it just can manifest into other things. Because it made me think about one of my previous guests, Samantha. And if you guys haven't heard her episode, I highly encourage you to listen back to it. She got addicted to opiates at age, I want to say, if I remember correctly, 13. It started off with Oxycontin, and then when those drugs, she liked the way it made her feel because she was suffering from some like internal struggles and physical, appearance issues, and so it made her feel really good. And then when those drugs got harder to get because they're really expensive, she started experimenting with heroin and then got addicted to that. And then where I'm going with this is she overdosed many times because of, like you said, you don't know what's in it. You get that extra lace of something if you get a different dealer, or even if you're using your same dealer. And like you said, he or she ran out of whatever. And then the next thing you know, you're overdosing. So how do you see, her story was so touching to me. She was able to overcome that addiction. It actually, and she ended up in prison and served her time and is now living an incredible, healthy life and is helping other people who have addiction, who struggle with addiction. What are the are there specific warning signs that you're seeing with children that, you feel like can manifest later? Like, how do I know if my kid's struggling?
Yes.
Or is there even like a real, like...
So isolation is the biggest probably trigger. And that's with any type of mental health, right? Kids just want to spend more time alone,
Yeah.
Not wanting to be with friends, loss of interest in things they used to love. If we're talking about like an addiction, it's finances, is looking at finances. And that's both with like screen addiction and substance addiction, and gaming addiction, because gaming addiction, you pay for these games, right? You pay for these kids, like you pay for all this stuff. So like when you notice like there's more money being spent, allowances aren't enough, if you notice that they're asking for more money, so I always say the financial piece is big, because yes, teenagers are going to ask for more money, right? Keeping a log, and having them keep a log, teaching budgeting, right? Of everything they spend and, what they spend it on. They're obviously not going to tell you if they're spending money on like weed or anything, but most teens don't have access to a lot of money, right? And if they have a job, right, and they have money, having them do a budget to show you where their money's going. I don't care if my kid spends, money at the gas station buying gummy sharks and chips, but they should have a receipt, and they should have to show me what they're spending on. And that way they also see it, right? It's like, oh, I'm spending, $200 every month at the gas station on snacks. Like, I don't want to do that, right? So I always say any type of large amounts of money missing. We see that a lot with gambling addiction with teens, because, teens, most of the gambling happens online. All you have to do is say, yes, I'm 18, click the button. They're not asking for an ID or anything. And it's typically like $20 up front or ish, like around there. And you're like, oh, $20 fee, not a big deal. Nothing is free, right? Nothing is free. And gambling websites hook you. So then you can use your winnings to buy more. But then when that runs out, which it will, you have to spend more and more and more. So being aware of finances is huge. Looking for social isolation, that is a sign that the brain is not in a good space. Something is not happening correctly. And also just if you have questions, it's about communication. Teens don't want to talk to their parents, but there's a lot of communication tools. There's actually going to be a video coming up on our website. I just did a workshop on parenting, through the social media crisis, and just giving tips and tricks, especially in communication. So that'll be up on our website if anyone's interested. To see that video in a couple of weeks, because a lot of really great information on how to better communicate with your teen. So lots of signs, and gut instinct, right? Parents, listen. We know.
We know.
Yeah. Right? Trust your gut. Trust your gut.
Yeah.
And I always say, kids nowadays have so little freedom, right? Because my kid tries to sneak out my window. Guess what? I have an app. I've got the ring, ting, 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 ting. Someone's out the window. Everyone's got cameras on their house. Even if for somehow they deactivate yours, their neighbors pick them up, leaving the house, and they're like, "Hey, I just saw, your son's leaving his house," right? They have no opportunities to get into trouble like we had back in the day. They don't, and it comes down to they don't. That's power. That's control, which is what all humans crave.
Yeah.
So we have to give them some room to screw up a little, right? So they learn. But when we're talking about addiction, we're talking substances, that's their life.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that I don't know any parent that's going to be willing to sacrifice that. And, something that I do is I offer a consultation service, and parents can come in, brings their teens. It's a one-time fee. It's not therapy. They bring in their teen. Surprise, you're getting drug tested today. I drug test them in the office. I do all that lab work. Wow. And then we sit down and talk about it, right? It's immediate. I have great drug tests. They can pick up alcohol for 52 hours. Listen, these are good drug tests. So if, like, for instance, like if the test lights up like a Christmas tree and everything is like, guess what? You need a higher level of care, right? Outpatient's not
Yeah.
going to work.
Oh, okay.
Say nothing lights up. Nothing lights up. Okay, then what else is going on, right? Because if your parents have this gut instinct something's wrong, maybe it's an eating disorder, right? Maybe it's, they're being bullied. And that gives them, a therapeutic space to kind of explore what's going on. And at that point, I can make referrals, whether that's a higher level of care, an eating disorder specialist, counseling for the parents, if they are just kind of like, helicoptery, which,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess. And there are other people that do consultation services like that. So, if you're in different parts of the country, you can look for, it's like just typically a consultation drug test for your teen. And if you follow your gut, I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of the best advice you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. You mentioned before when you were talking about the chemicals in the brain and how those all like work out and are related to addiction. I see a lot on social media, again, is probably one of the worst culprits, but as well, even just talking with people in general. So many people who have never been in that experience before or who have never experienced any kind of addiction always say it's a choice. It is, they are choosing to be addicted. They can decide to put it down and walk away from it. Or they, like almost like they want that lifestyle. What do you have to say about that?
There are elements within it that are a choice. But there are elements where something else is in control of your life, right? And if you're hooked on meth, heroin, oxys, chemically, it's going to take a lot more than just a choice, right? And that's like telling someone who's like clinically depressed, it's your choice that you're sad.
Yeah.
Same thing. Like that, it's not like people who suffer from extreme anxiety or suicidality, like they don't want to feel like that.
Yeah.
No one wants to feel like that. So a part of it, yes, there is a element of it that it's a choice, but there's also a bigger element that it's not.
Yeah.
Right. And people who think like, oh, and there's tons of like great memes about like, well, that was entirely unhelpful. Right.
Yeah.
When someone tells you like, well,
just
why do you, right, be happy, right? Just be happy, choose to be happy.
Yeah.
That doesn't always work. Sometimes it takes therapists, sometimes it takes medication, sometimes it takes medication therapists and like IOP, like sometimes it takes more, right? And that's, depending on what your, brain reacted to a trauma or, what we call like, if you've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences and you don't have a lot of protective factors, right? You don't necessarily have resilience. Right. So the thing we know about resilience is everyone has adverse childhood experiences, right? Which tip the scale, right? So that like poverty is a great example, right? If you grow up in poverty, guess what? Scale is tipped. If you have protective factors, right? Which is allies, which is people in your life that tell you, great teachers, right? Therapists, counselors, parents who are like, we may be in poverty. You may be in poverty, but guess what? I believe that you are absolutely worthy to get an education and to be successful. And here are some like tips. Even if I can't teach you this, let's see where we can, right? And let's see where, and so like ACEs, like adverse childhood experiences, like as we have the protective factors, we're then able to say, okay, that's resilience. That's what makes people resilient. And so we have to be able to provide those protective factors.
Yeah. I mean, such great advice. What made you decide to pursue this profession? I think, it takes a special person to be willing to dive into someone's story and their life on a daily basis and, battle with them. What made you decide that this was what you wanted to do?
So this is my second career, right? And I was in business before. I worked for corporate and had the life, lots of money, long hours. My hair always looked good. That's it.
Yeah.
No, but I did that for over a decade. I always wanted to be a therapist, and in undergrad, like I have 2 bachelor's degrees in psychology and sociology were one of them. And I always wanted to be a therapist when I was younger. And 2 things kind of like happened that kind of made me go the business route. One was money. I got sucked into the financial, oh my gosh, I could pay off my school loans, like, from undergrad. Like,
Yeah.
and so part of it was money. The other part was more personal. So when I was in my young 20s, my adopted younger brother had a brain aneurysm, and he did die. And in the process, I wasn't living at home because I was an undergrad. And I had this experience where, like, I have a sister who's much younger than me. I have a lot of sisters who I love. And she was much younger than me. I was about to graduate with a degree, sociology and psychology. And when my brother passed away, there is something about a parent who loses a child that I hope no one has to ever see. Because there is no more raw or real pain in this world than watching a parent lose their child. And so in that situation, like, I got to the hospital and seeing my mom and dad and my brother, it broke me in a way that I was not in a space that I could have been a therapist. I wasn't. And I had a younger sister who was living at home, and I was really concerned about her. And so I actually moved home, and my fiance at the time moved back home with his parents, and we just were like, you know what, this is what my youngest sister needs, is what my parents need support. And I dealt with a lot of stuff, and I was not in a place where I could emotionally handle anything outside of, like, my family unit.
Right.
And I can honestly say, because that sister was so much younger than me, by the time she could remember things, I was kind of gone. I mean, I was in high school. Like, by the time she could remember, I was in sports, high school, driving. So that year and a half I lived at home, for her and I were like, we were buds. Like, I would drive her places. Like, when my parents were really just struggling, really struggling and emotionally, I'd be like, let's go get some donuts. Like, and we would just drive, and we would get, like, I just took her, and that formed our relationship, like, in a really genuine way. So between my trauma, right, of losing my adopted brother, and the trauma of, like, seeing my parents in a way that no one should ever have to see their parents, and helping with my sister, and, like, seeing her grow into the most genuine, like, beautiful, like, human, and then the money, I just was like, you know what? This is where I'm at. I'm not in a space where I can be a therapist right now. Yeah. So I didn't. And I actually had applied to graduate school, and I didn't get in, which, I graduated undergrad with 2 bachelor's degrees, like 8 sets of honors, like almost perfect GPA. And I didn't get into graduate school. I was like, what?
What?
Like, I was crushed. I was like, I am smart. Like, what the hell? And it was 100% fate that I did not get into graduate school. So I was not in a place where I would have done well. So fast forward many years, and my husband and I are living in Boston, and I'm working there, same company, right? And my husband and I are both in business. We're living in the city of Boston. We love Boston, and it's like our heart. I was really unhappy at work, and the job that I was at started making some decisions that were based on money and not people. And they were making decisions that were directly against the core principles of the company. And I was not happy with that. And so I applied to graduate school and I got in, which was like, yay. They actually, fun fact, I don't know how they got my information. To this day, no one at Boston College has been able to tell me how my name got put on a list. I got a random email saying, hey, we think you should apply for this program. And I was in business. Like, there is no way. Like, literally, I'm like, how did they get my email? And they had asked me to apply for a dual master's program, so 2 master's degrees at the same time. And I was like, I work like 78-hour weeks. There's no way.
No way.
There's no way. But I was so unhappy with my job. And so I applied. I was like, whatever, I'm not going to get in. And I probably couldn't afford it because it's Boston College, let's be real. And so they came back and I got in almost immediately. And they also offered to pay for a large chunk of one of the master's degrees. And I was like, okay. So I went to my bosses and I tried to put in my notice. And that I was going to be a full-time student. And they said no, they wouldn't accept it. And they doubled my salary pretty much.
Oh my God.
Yeah, legitimately. They doubled, like, I was like, what? And so, everyone has a price of like, they can take like BS up to a certain amount for a certain price, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, you're going to double my already good salary. And I'll stay till I'm done with graduate school.
Yeah.
And so I did graduate school full time. I worked full time.
Jeez,
and
girl,
through that, like,
what?
I know. And I finished my last day of classes on my due date with my firstborn.
Wow.
He was late. He was 16 days late. And then I was doing my rotation, and my son was 3 months old when I started my rotation. And 3 months later, when I was a week before I defended my thesis, I found out I was pregnant again. So I defended my thesis, and I finished my rotation and graduated before I had my second son. So literally pure chaos.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that there's no way. Like Boston College just like emailed me one day. It was like, we think you should apply for this program. Fate, fate, like literally, like that was like, here you go. This is where the universe, like this is where God wants you.
I'm literally dropping that in your lap. Like
literally.
when people say that stuff doesn't happen, you're like, yeah, right.
Listen,
it literally
100% it happens. And my husband was so supportive because I ended up leaving that job right before my first son was born. And so my husband was like, and granted, we're high school sweethearts. We've been together forever. And literally there's no way I could have done it without him. Like, no way. And like, even like before I got pregnant with my first, I got in a really bad car wreck. I broke a ton of ribs. Like, I had to sleep sitting up straight for 6 months and in grad school and working. And he was like, no, like, you can do this. Like, there's no way I could have done it. And when I stopped working, he got a second job. So like, he was working 2 jobs. And like, I was in graduate school and a mom, and like, it just was so, yeah. I literally tell people like, listen, this is the wildest story ever.
It is.
Becoming a therapist, I felt like if I can do all of those things, like in graduate school, then guess what? I am 100% meant to be in this field. And I'm in a place now where I'm far enough removed from, my trauma as well as like therapy. Like, that was a huge part of like my healing process, and my family's healing process in a lot of ways. And, if all of those things can happen, like, you know what? I am meant to be exactly where I am.
I am where I'm supposed to be. That is an incredible story. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh my gosh. That leads me to a question that I wanted to ask you, just because I've seen this statement a few times, but particularly I've seen in a mom's group that I'm a part of where one of the mothers, their child was in crisis and needed to see somebody that could help them, but they weren't able to get into, there was nobody that had availability. And they were, one of the, metaphors that they were using, or I don't even know if metaphor would be the proper word for that, but they were like, what if, my kid broke their foot and they got to walk around on a broken foot for 3 months. Like, they were just kind of fussing. And like, I understand like the frustration behind that. But at the same time, like, there are literally only so many hours in a day and so many therapists. So my question to you is this a field that you're seeing, or do you know if this is becoming a popular field for people to want to do this as a profession, or is it just that much of an influx of people who need help that there's not enough people to help them?
Yeah. So what I have to say about crisis is by the time your kid's in crisis or you're in a crisis, you needed therapy 6 months ago.
Okay.
Right? So
yeah,
at that point, like the second your gut tells you something's wrong, be proactive.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not me judging any other mom. Listen, like, we
right.
all like,
but
don't
just to
see
be
things.
more aware. Like, I know myself that I've tried to, with, I've got a preteen who is going through changes, and I have to like remind myself, because we get caught up in our own lives, with children are a part of our lives, that we get caught up in it, that I've tried to be more present and aware, so like you're saying, warning signs come up.
Warning signs, like being aware of them, picking up on them. So that's the first thing. The second piece is the amount of influx of people that we are seeing in therapy and coming to therapy the first time is astronomical. We cannot keep up. That's true, right? I mean, during like the height of COVID, I think my wait list was like 50 or 60 people. Like, and I have 60 people on my caseload. Like, so you're talking like, I could get rid of every person on my caseload and fill my caseload and still have a wait list. like that is that's not real. And granted, now it's more manageable, but like, yes, COVID made people face themselves in a way that they had not. They were at work. They were running from a lot of problems, right? Distraction coping is powerful, but the problems never truly go away. So we are seeing a massive influx of people needing therapy or just wanting therapy for the first time. Just like teachers, right? Older therapists were like,
I can't
so many teachers retired when COVID happened. They're like, I'm over this. I've been doing this for too long. I'm taking really time. Yeah. So
understandably
I do know a lot. Right. And I always say, like, so a lot of therapists retired. So in therapy, the schooling to be a therapist is grueling. And I think that that's something like a lot of people don't realize, is that it is not just a 2-year program. It is 2 years of classes and 1 year of rotation, probably depending on which accreditation you're with, whether it's K-Prep or Core, either like 1,000 to 6,000 hours of in-person training, not including your classes, not including, all of your other stuff. Like, it's the amount of work that it takes to be a therapist deters a lot of people from being a therapist. And there are some schools that even if you pass, even if you do well, there has been some schools that are like, you're not going to be a good therapist. So we're not giving you the letter that you need to give to the boards of where you're going to say you are in a space where you can be a therapist. So there's a lot of things. And even if you take, I've taken Massachusetts boards pass, I've taken North Carolina boards pass, I've taken the national board and pass. There's constantly, we're always, it's a transforming field, just like the health industry, just like the medical industry, right? So, I mean, we are kind of part of that industry, but there's always new things to learn and always new things to, we have to do continuing ed, we have to do, so it's a field that is grueling, and the financial pay is not as good as it probably should be. Which is like teachers, people are like, well, why would you go get a master's degree in education to make $35,000 a year? I don't know. I can't. I don't know. If therapists make more than that, yes. But there's also the piece that there's not great pay. So yes, we're at a national shortage for therapists. I mean, when some therapists are duly licensed in different states because there's rules about that. There's all types of rules. And with telehealth, right, the best thing about telehealth is people who work 9 to 5, right? Therapists, a lot of therapists work 9 to 5. I work in the evenings, but most therapists work 9 to 5. So when people could actually have therapy in the evenings and there's no availability. So now they can do it on their lunch break, right?
Yeah.
Moms who are at home with sleeping toddlers, oh, my kid sleeps for an hour and a half. I can do a therapy session,
Yes.
right? So
I
like
do love some telehealth.
Right? So telehealth has completely transformed the availability of therapy. So there's a lot of different pieces to it. Yes, COVID. Yes, our true economic crisis. Our, the state of the world. We're not going to get into it, but just like, the toxic stress levels, right? I mean, there's all these like jokes and memes of like millennials have survived, like, like the recession.
Right. Oh my God, I seen one the other day. I was like,
pandemics, like so, right? Like, so yes, there's a piece of it that is like, but anyone who has gone through this many like crappy things back to back needs a therapist.
Yeah.
And because telehealth is like so easily accessible now, like you can technically do it from your phone in your car on your lunch break or, so there's a lot of things that are going towards that. And it takes a special person to be a therapist, right? There are bad therapists out there. I wish there weren't. There are. And they're licensed and they're with boards and they've checked all the boxes and they're awful. They're maybe not awful. That's not nice to say. They have a different style that is sometimes was like entirely unhelpful. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I say if you feel like you want to be a therapist, like talk to a therapist, like get some feedback, if you're wanting to go into that field, yes. It takes a right. You go, you can do it. And I always say, I'm like, in graduate school, they tell you self-care. It is impossible. Yeah. It is impossible in a graduate program. And that's if you don't have another job, you don't have kids, you don't have a partner, that you have like other responsibilities, right? And it's still so hard. Like self-care is impossible in graduate school.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like, it's the realness, like, I love reality therapy. So I'm like, the reality is you've got 3 years of kind of hell, but then you have a career where you can make a difference the rest of your life.
Oh, you just gave me cold chills. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I love that outlook on that. I don't think I ever realized, I guess just ignorance. I didn't realize like how intense it was. I just think I might have, if you would have asked, I think now I'm a little bit more knowledgeable, but if you would have asked me like before I started this podcast, like I thought, I don't know, you go to community college and get some credentials and, but it makes sense that it is a grueling thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. And if you
if you're interested
that's
in
probably
doing
not
the
as
work,
intense.
Yeah, it's not as intense, and I have my own feelings about life coaches. I think some are phenomenal, especially like holistic life coaches. I also think that there should be a very fine line of, this is a mental health thing, not a coaching thing.
Yes.
Right? Like if you're switching careers, yes, right? A life coach is super helpful when you're switching careers and like maintaining like, your identity, your followership, etc. But like, if you're having troubles letting go and you're like really struggling, like that's not a life coach job. That's a therapist job, right? So there's a fine line of like where life coaches should be like,
that
a therapist.
That's also like, I follow a lot of therapists on Instagram, and one of them had made a comment, or not a comment, but like made a post about, making sure that you're not using social media to replace. Yes, there are a lot of great coping tools and things that you can learn on the internet to like handle situations in life. And I think that having that in your face all the time, if you're going to be on a screen, is wonderful, but don't replace medical help, real life therapy with what you see on the internet. So, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
I wish we were on Zoom. I'd send you like the claps.
The clappies. Yeah.
The claps on Zoom. I would send them to you all that.
Right. So would you have any advice for someone who maybe has never sought out any therapy, that just feels like they're on that edge and they're like, maybe I do need to talk to somebody? What would be your advice for them?
I would say just normalizing it. Everyone needs a therapist at some point in their life, every single person. Whether they choose to do it or not, that's up to them. But I always say humans are resilient, right? Humans are resilient. We have survived this many years. Like, we're resilient.
Right.
You can probably get through it. Probably you can get through it, right? But do you want to suffer to get through it, or do you want to grow through it? Right? Because yes, you could get through it, but wouldn't you rather grow through it?
I love that. Oh my gosh. I'm going to like put that on my mirror.
Yes.
I love it. Oh my gosh. I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I don't want to take up any more of your valuable time. You have lots of people to help, but thank you so much for being on today. I'm also going to link the information. You are local to me, so I will link your practices information for anyone that's local that would like to reach out to you guys. And you probably have. Do you have social media?
We do. So if you follow Louisville Family Counseling, so you just like at Louisville Family Counseling on Facebook. I actually do a mental health Monday post every Monday. And so it's just like mental health tips. It doesn't replace therapy, but it also helps you in different ways.
Yeah.
And so if you're interested in that, but yes, we have that. We have a YouTube channel on the website. We have tons of videos. So we have like, the owner of the practice, Jennifer Locklear, does like a mindfulness walking video, like teaching people like some mindfulness tricks. I have videos that I need to redo that I did. Like I did a coping with Corona video series, like month 1 and 2 of COVID.
Oh yeah.
And so like 2 years in, I should probably like.
Yeah, I need to revamp this a little bit.
And you know, it's funny. I went back and someone had said they went and watched it, and they said you should go watch it. And it was like, you know, guys, it should probably only be another month or 2 or something along those lines. And I'm like,
oh yeah, guys. I need to redo this.
So
awesome.
Lots of great stuff on our website. Also, we do a ton of like free workshops. Like I said, I just did one. I do a preventing teen suicide workout. Tells you what I have on my mind for today. So I do a preventing teen suicide workshop for parents twice a year.
Wow.
And I do, so like that'll be like on the website. So if you wanted to like see what workshops we're doing for free, and those are free for the community. Just because they're such big topics that I feel like, you know, everyone should know the information and should know resources and stuff like that. So, and like I said, the video that I just did the workshop this past Saturday, is like it's social media 101, how to support your teens through the social media crisis. And so that video should be up soon, but I'm also doing another one of those workshops in the fall.
Awesome.
So looking at our website, following our social media, Louisville Family Counseling, those are the best ways to see what we're doing, see if there's anything like, you know, workshop wise. And I'm not the only, therapist that does workshops and stuff. So we have other ones. And so those are all on there. So absolutely.
Very cool. Awesome. Yes. I will link all that so that you guys that are listening that would like to check that out will just be a click away. But thank you so much for being on today. It was such a great, I learned so much from you and I appreciate it. And I know that there's going to be other people that are going to definitely value this information, but thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy we connected. So
me too. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I want to thank my guests again for sharing their incredible story of transformation with us. I'm going to link their social medias below so that you can give them a follow. And of course, if you guys felt personally connected to the story and you would like to support the podcast by purchasing one of the limited edition prints that goes along with it, you can do so at my new website. It is iampower.club. And of course, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at iampowerclub. And lastly, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss next week's episode of I Am Power. We will see you then.